Hi folks, in this video tutorial I'm going to look at Spring Boot with Spring MVC, JPA, Hibernate and mysql. I'm going to look at one of the previous tutorials we did without Spring Boot, basically the RESTful web service tutorial and the web app tutorial that were using Spring MVC, JPA, Hibernate and mysql, and I'm going to convert that to use Spring Boot. So firstly, the Spring Boot will define the POM file, pom.xml file, which is used by the Maven with all the Spring Boot related dependencies. The easiest way to get that dependency is go into Spring Initializer website. So it's basically https start.spring.io, and you can pick the group and also the artifact. I'm going to leave them as it is because I'm going to modify the existing application to Spring Boot. So I'm only interested in what's in the pom.xml file. But if you are building a brand new Spring Boot from scratch, I'll recommend come in and fill all these details and it will automatically give you a skeleton. And then you can import, you can download a zip file. And once you download the zip file, you can import that into Eclipse as an existing Maven file. So I'm going to go here into the dependencies and I'm interested in web. So I'm going to type in web. So full stack web developers, I'm going to select that. So it says I have selected the web. I'm going to do JPA. So I'm going to select JPA here. And then I'm going to use MySQL database. So I need the MySQL database driver. So I'm going to use the MySQL. And it's going to select that. I'm going to check here what else I need. So if you look at here, so I also need the REST repositories. So I go back in here and click REST, type in REST, and I'm going to get the REST repositories, and that's all I need. And then I can click on generate project, and it's going to allow you to download. I've already downloaded these. You can save this. It's going to be the demo.zip file. So if I go to the demo.zip file here, you can see inside the demo, the pom.xml file. It has even added the .gitignore. Then you have the normal Maven structure, source main Java. Then it got source main resources. So if it is a brand new, it also put an application.properties file, which is you will be entering the Spring application properties for the database connections, for the Hibernate properties, and so on. So if you are building a brand new project, you can easily import these into Eclipse and then start writing your classes and filling in the application.properties and so on. But in this case, I'm only interested in the pom.xml file. So I open the pom.xml file and I have already copied that into my pom.xml file here. And we'll quickly go through that. So basically it is importing a parent, so which is the Spring Boot starter parent, and we are using release 1.56, and we are adding some properties which is a 1.8, and there are other properties here. So you may ask, in sometimes you may have a parent POM, company-wide parent POM. In scenarios where you have a company-wide parent POM, you can't use a Spring Boot starter parent. In that case, you can use it as a bill of material POM, Spring bill of material POM, and you can import use that as a dependency here, and you will be extending the parent POM of your company-wide parent POM, whatever you have. So you might be defining the versions and so on. So in here inside the dependencies, we're having a dependency for the data JPA. So JPA is an interface, and then we call JPA will make call to Hibernate as an implementation we're going to use here. Then we're going to use RESTful web service repositories. We're going to use, then you need a starter data REST. Then Spring Boot starter web. So all these are like Spring Boot starter as a prefix, and then you have data JPA, data REST, and web. This is a Spring MVC web. And when you bring in the Spring MVC web, it will also bring in an embedded Tomcat, which makes it easier to run and debug your application. And then once you're happy with it, then you can build up the WAR file and you can deploy to an external Tomcat. But by default, you have an embedded Tomcat and you can run it as a normal application, which we'll see pretty soon. And the packaging here we're going to use is a jar, which is a Java archive packaging. And then we need to add some additional dependencies, is because we are going to use JSP as the web technology, so which needs Tomcat embed Jasper, and we need JSTL, which is for the JSTL tags will be used in the JSP. And normally if you don't put a final name, when you build a WAR file or a jar file, it'll come up with a name as the project. So in this case, it'll come as simple-orm persistence.jar. You can override that with providing a name here. So I'm here overriding that with the final name being simple web as opposed to simple-orm persistence.jar. And then there's another additional plugin that I'm adding. Because I'm going to use the jar, I need a Uber jar. So it needs to contain all the other dependency jars. So because all these starter test and connector Java and all these starter web will be recursively bringing in a lot of other dependencies, and all these jars need to be included in all the contents of these jars need to be included into one big jar, which is called the Uber jar. And this plugin will allow you to add everything into one jar file. I also forgot to mention this. We also have a dependency to connect to the MySQL database. This is the driver, and we are using this as a runtime because we don't need this driver to compile, but we need it when the application is running, which is a runtime. And this scope is test, which is mainly required for testing purpose, which is a Spring Boot starter test. And then all this provided means basically we only need it for compiling, but we are not required when we really run it because the Tomcat will provide this dependency. And if we don't provide any scope, the default is compile. That means the dependency is required for us to compile the code. So once the pom.xml file is out of the way, we got all the Spring Boot dependencies. You can go to the project and I can click on Maven and then say update project, and you can go into the dependencies here. So if I go into Maven dependencies, you can see all the dependencies, just a few. So we only mentioned that's the power of Spring Boot. So if you don't use Spring Boot, you got to bring in all the dependencies individually. And how do you know like what to bring in? So you need to know quite a few of those dependencies you need to bring in. If you look at one of the previous RESTful web service or the web app applications that we built, you will see far more dependencies than what we have here. And Spring Boot really simplifies it by allowing you to say, okay, I want JPA, I want RESTful web service, I want web. So you specify very high level requirements, and then it will automatically bring in everything required for that. And the Spring Initializer is a very good place to start because you know what you're going to build. So you say I want web, I want security, I want actuator. So actuator is mainly if you want any metrics in your application, you can bring in the actuator. So if I type in actuator here, and then you can bring in the actuator and you can generate it, and it automatically generates a POM file. So now we go back here and look at some of these dependencies. You got if not hundreds, there'll be 50, 60 dependencies here. And the key one of the key ones to notice is an embedded Tomcat. So you will see an embedded Tomcat. Here it is, Tomcat embedded WebSocket and Spring Boot starter Tomcat. So the Tomcat is embedded into it, make the testing and debugging easier. So now we have got this, and we'll quickly go through the other layers. And also another thing I want to mention is if you go into Spring IO guides, the guides will give you a lot of examples about how to get started. For example, in this case, we're going to use the MySQL driver. So I type in MySQL because that's the one we are going to use as a database. and here accessing data with MySQL. So I click on it, and it's going to give me some sample code and some guidelines as to how to build it. So if you're using Git, it'll tell you how to clone. You can get some examples from the Git repository itself and have a look. And also it gives you a bit about how to build with Gradle, how to build with Maven, and so on. And also it shows you need to fill up the application.properties file for the MySQL, and you got to fill in these details about DDL, the URL, data source URL, the username and password required for the data source, and so on. And it'll also give you a sample example of creating a model when you can annotate it, and this is for the hibernate, and then hibernate will make a connection with the database and you can retrieve the data. So there's an example here. So now let's get back to our example and let's start looking at application.properties is where in the source main resources folder, this is where you'll be specifying all the connection details. You don't have to have a table ready, so you need to have a database. So this is a database, JDBC, MySQL, localhost, the Learn Java DB. And here the model I'm going to use, if you look into the common model, account.java is the model. This is very similar to the model that we used in the previous RESTful JPA tutorials. So you have at entity annotation, you have at table and saying there should be a table called account. ID is the primary key, and we got some parameters ID, name, and balance. And in the application.properties file, I've commented this out because the very first time you run it, you uncomment and run it. So it's automatically is going to create a table called account in the database called Learn Java DB. But the subsequent times you want to comment it out, because every time otherwise the data you already have will be lost. It's going to create a new table for you. So after you have created it once, which is a handy thing because you don't have to write the DDL to create it, it'll automatically create the DDL for you and it'll create the table for you. And subsequent times you comment it and run it again because table is there, you don't have to recreate the table again. And the properties you're interested in Spring data source.url, so that will give you the link how to connect to the MySQL database. This is the username and password we are using. And then we are going to use the Tomcat data source. So we already looked at a data source will allow you to have a pool of connections, because when multiple users will be coming through multiple threads via the web container, you will fork out a connection to each thread. So you need multiple connections. So we are going to use the data source that's within the Tomcat. Then we need the hibernate properties. We are saying we are going to use the MySQL dialect, and it's saying to generate new mappings or not. We are set it to false here. Format SQL to true, so that it will show you the SQL, so you can see it on the Tomcat's console, the log, what SQLs are getting generated by Hibernate. Then you can also debug SQL. You can set it to debug, so this will show the SQL as well. And we also put it to trace, so we'll get more information when Hibernate is running. So once we have the application.properties, we got the model account.java that maps to the model. Next we will go to the DAO layer. So the DAO layer here is very similar to the previous tutorials where we did. We have an interface here. The interface is having a number of methods: get account, save account, and get account. That is, you pass an ID, you'll get one account. Save account is from the form you will capture the new account details and map that to the account, and then that gets saved to the database. And get accounts will get all the accounts from the database. So now we have seen the account interface. Let's look at the account DAO.impl. In the account DAO.impl, we are saying this is a repository, and this is the same as defining as add component. So it's saying it's a Spring component, so it can be dependency injected into the service layer. Add transactionals to say that Spring will manage the transaction. And here the entity manager. So in one of the previous tutorials, we had the util class and we had the persistence.xml and so on. When you use Spring Boot, you don't need the persistence.xml file. In the application.properties file, we have defined all the JDBC and Hibernate properties. Not the JDBC, sorry, the database connectivity properties and the hibernate properties. And here the entity manager, you just annotate with @persistence context, and then here are the different methods. So first one is em.create query. We are doing select a from account A, that means select all the accounts, and it will return a list of accounts. The next method is save account. You pass an account and it will persist to the database, and you say return true, means it has persisted, succeeded. And then there's another query. You pass the ID, which is a primary key, account ID, and it will do a select query for that ID and it will return just one account. So that's the DAO layer. All the code that is used here is provided in the link below. That will give you step by step everything, so including the code, so you can try it, and also with bare minimum explanation. So this video tutorial and this post step by step will complement each other in practicing Spring Boot all the way with Spring MVC, JPA, and Hibernate. If you find this a little bit difficult, that means you haven't done any of the previous tutorials. So once you have done simple tutorials on RESTful Web Service, JPA, setting up Eclipse, Maven, and so on, this tutorial must be a lot easier to follow. And let's go back and have a look at the service layer. So we have done the DAO layer, and I'm going to look at the service layer. So service layer is basically a wrapper. Normally service layer will have business logic. In this case we are keeping it simple, so all the service layer is going to do is going to inject the DAO layer and then call the DAO layer to get the data. So we define the account.service, which is an interface. Same methods, get accounts, return a list of accounts, save account, takes an account and save it to the database via the DAO, and get account will get in one account by the ID. And if you look at the implementation, all it does is it defines as a service, is same as add component annotation. This is basically a Spring annotation to say this can be injected into the controller. We will look at the controller next, and here it is auto wired. The account DAOs, basically the account DAO is injected, so basically it will inject any account DAO implementation that got the repository annotation, and also which implements this particular interface. So basically account DAO, the dimple that we looked at earlier, gets injected here, and we'll be making the call, say get account, save account, and get account by the IDN. Now let's look at the controller. We got two controllers. One controller is to demonstrate the RESTful web service. The other controller is for the UI. So let's look at the RESTful web service controller. So it's annotated with @REST controller, and then we got the request mapping saying anything with the URI v1 forecasting will come into this controller, and we are dependency injecting the account service, because account service will then use the account DAO, and then account DAO will make use of the entity manager, and via Hibernate it will go to the database and get the data. So we're going to get the list of accounts, so we're calling the account service.get accounts, that will return a list of accounts. So that's all. So we are doing a request mapping and is accounts. So anything with v1 forecasting accounts will come into this method and will go to the database and get the accounts. So this is the RESTful web service controller, and let's look at the controller that we use for the web app, so which is called the UI controller. So the UI controller is same. So instead of annotating with @REST controller, we are annotating with just @controller, which is a web app controller. And the request mapping is UI, so anything with UI accounts will come into this method. And we're also injecting the account service, because we need the account service to go via account DAO and go to the database and get the data. So here we are setting up the model view, and we are saying accounts. This is saying we're going to use the accounts.jsp page. This accounts.jsp page is very similar to the Spring web app tutorial, Spring MVC web app tutorial we did before. Then it's going to get the accounts, and it's going to set it to the model, and then the view will come and get the data out of the model, and it will populate the view. Similarly, display form is used for displaying an empty form, so you can fill up the account details, and then we are going to go to the so that's all it does. So it returns a form, and when you click on the click button new account, is going to come here and it's going to save. It's going to get the account details, whatever you. So this displays an empty form, and when you click on submit, it'll come in here, and then it'll pick up the values the user entered in the form, and it's going to go to the account service. It's going to go to the account service and save the account first, and then it gets all the list of accounts back. And then finally, you pass in the account details, account ID. That means you click on the link with a particular ID, and it's going to go to the database and get the details of one particular account. So that's what this controller does. So this controller is very much similar to the previous tutorial that we did with the Spring MVC. Same is the RESTful Web Service controller as well. Now let's look at the JSP pages. So that will be under source main, web app, webinf views, and will be in here. So when we look at the JSP pages, it's important that we look at it has been already configured as well. So if you look at the config, the other web initializer config, I have removed it. It's no longer required for the Spring Boot, but we need this simple web configuration here so that we can bootstrap our view resolver. So we're going to use the JSP as a view resolver. So we are saying the view resolver, the JSP pages will be under webinf views folder, and it will have the suffix of .jsp. And we are saying enable webMVC, and you're also annotating with that configuration. And also we are doing a component scan, so it can scan and find the relevant components like the repository, the service, the DAO layer, and so on. So we need anything with com.mytutorial will look under these packages for the relevant annotation, like in the at controller we have at controller as controller, so it'll look up all those annotations, and all those controllers, service, and the DAO layers will be automatically wired. That's what's called the dependency injection. They will be, all the dependencies will be resolved and wired up. So if you look at the JSP pages, the accounts JSP page is what it displays all the accounts. I'm not going to go into details which we have covered in one of the previous tutorials. And then you also have account details, will display just the account detail, and also have a new account that will just display an empty form to capture the new account details. And another important thing with the Spring Boot app is I've already mentioned that there's an embedded Tomcat. So all you have to do, so I'll close all this, file, close all. There's an app.java that we added inside the com.mytutorial. So if I look at the app.java, all it has is this called @Spring Boot application annotation. And then you do, this is the app class, and this extends the Spring Boot servlet initializer. So this initializer and the code here is required only if you want to package this up and deploy it to an external WAR. But if you're going to run it internally, then you don't need this Spring Boot initializer and this particular line of code. All you need is just public static void main spring application.run, and this app.class is this class here, and you just put the args here. If you pass any args via this main method, that gets passed here. So there are a number of different ways you can run this application. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my MySQL database server. So the way you start is MySQL daemon -- console. So let's start the database here. Once this database is started, I'm going to open a client and quickly show the table that we already have there. So this is the table, so I've already here. So if I go into MySQL and describe the account, this is ID, balance, and name, and this is the account table here, and primary key is the ID, which is of type varchar, and the balance is of type decimal, and name is of type varchar. So this table was initially created automatically because we all in the application.properties file, I ran it the first time with ddl create uncommented. So it has created it. Now I'm commenting it because I already have a table with some data in it. If I go and run it again, it's going to delete all the data, drop those tables, and we're going to create another table. So the way to connect to MySQL is here, MySQL -user and in this case I think it's user123 -p for password. Sorry, it should be mysql, I missed the y, and put the password as pwd123. So this is the client basically connecting to the mysql daemon server that's running here. So via the client I can execute a lot of SQL queries. So I'm going to first say use the table that we are using, the database, sorry, is called the learn java db. So I'm going into the mysql command line prompt and I'm going to say use that particular table. So I'm going to do paste here and semicolon. So this database has changed to that particular database. Now if I go and do select star from account, so account is a table inside the database learn java db, and I have one row which is got ID 111, balance $256.06, and name is John. So now my SQL database daemon is running. You don't have to start any Tomcat or anything like that. So all I have to do now here is go to this app.java. So this is where the Spring Boot magic. So one is the pom.xml file is much simplified. You only bring in a few dependencies and everything else is brought in automatically via the transitive dependencies. And then I have to set up the app.java, and now I right click on it and I can say run as Java application, and then you will see the Spring Boot application will just start like that, and it is starting up now. So you can say Spring Boot release version 1.56. Might take a few seconds to start up. So while it's starting, keep an eye out for any errors. So it has already started. So started app in 16.879 seconds, running in port 8080. So I go to the browser now, and firstly I'm going to hit the controller that gives you the RESTful web service, which is going to return a JSON data. So I'm going to say version 1 forecasting accounts. So if I click on this, refresh this again, so it's saying no, there's no explicit mapping for this particular version. Yes, I know why it is. So I have to take the simple web out because this is running with an embedded version. So everything starts with, there's no context, there is localhost 8080 and then v1 forecasting accounts. So v1 forecasting accounts is what we looked up in the controller. So if I go back to the accounts controller, it's basically v1 forecasting account service. So it's now v1 forecasting account service v1 forecasting accounts. Click enter again. Now I get the JSON data back. So what I'm getting back is ID 111, name is John, and balance is 256, which is same as what's in the database here. 111, 256, and John. Now I'll go and hit the next one, which is the accounts UI accounts, which is our web app. In this case also I don't need the simple web. I'm going to hit this. I get the ID 111, name is John, and $256.06. I'm going to add a new account. I'm going to call 222. Name is Peter, and balance is say $303.30. I click on save. It has added this 222 Peter $303.30. I can also go to my backend database. I can do the same select star from account. Now I've got 2 entries here because it has already added to the database. Now I go back to my code, I click on one of these, it'll just show me the 111, name is John, balance, and $256.06. It calls the UI account details and pass in as a path parameter 1111. That's what we get in the UI. If I go back to my UI controller, and I can see here, new account details, and account ID is captured as 111. that gets passed into account service get account ID and it returns it. So this is all good. And another good thing about that is it's very easy to debug as well. So if I want to debug this, I'll just stop here. So this has stopped. You can also see in the console it has already printed out, because you see we have put some print line statements, and also we said the hibernate to show all the queries that is generating. So it shows the queries that it is sending to hibernate. So if I clear this, I can run this in the debug mode. So I can say debug as Java application, and I will go into my DAO, which is the account DAO impl, and where it does the get accounts, I'm going to put a debug point and see if it stops. I think it has started now. I'll go back and rerun this get all accounts. Sorry, it's not the new account, it's get accounts. So presenter, so even though it complained about the line attribute is required, it's actually gone and stopped at the account DAO.impl. So you can easily debug now Spring application. So we are basically running with an embedded Tomcat. So I now step through. So this is step over, step return, step out, step in, and so on. So if I go to the next level now, here I can see what the result is. It has already gone and taken the results from the database. So I can go in here and inspect what's in the result. I've got two accounts, basically two. They are the balance ID 111 John with the amount of $256, and the next one we just added, which is ID 222 named Peter with $303.30. So you can easily debug, and then I debug, play that through, and now I got the balance back. So now we have seen how to run it as an embedded inside Eclipse. You can also run it outside via the jar file, because we already said to build a Uber jar. There's a plugin, I showed you that Maven Spring Boot Maven plugin that builds the jar. So I'm going to stop this from running inside, and let's go and run it from a command line. So I'm going to click back on here. This is in the debug mode here on the top right hand corner. So this way, go and select on this here and just click on the stop button, so it stops. And if you look at, if I'm going to do run as, and I'm going to do Maven clean and then do Maven install, so that will build the Uber jar file. And it's building the Uber jar file mainly because of this Spring Boot Maven plugin that builds, that unwraps all the individual jar files that are shown here. All the jar files under these Maven dependencies here is going to unpack one by one and put them all into one big jar file, and it's called the simpleweb.jar. So this is the plugin here. It's called org spring framework boot, and it's called Spring Boot Maven plugin. So I've cleaned it and I'm going to run it now. So I'll minimize this, right click on it and say run as Maven install, and it's going to build it inside the target. Target is empty now, so once it starts building, you will see the files get compiled first and then packaged. Now here the target is finished building. if you're going to target C, you have the simple web jar. If I go and right click on it and look at the properties, it will be a big jar file, because see, it is 32 megabytes, because not only all the packages and classes from my project, but also all the Maven dependencies get packaged. So now it has built the WAR file. So I can go into the simple web WAR files. It has already built it. So all I have to do is copy this and paste it to the Tomcat installation that I already have. So which is a C drive projects. Sorry, it's inside C tools, Apache Tomcat, and inside the web apps folder, which I have already copied. So once you copy the simple web.war file, when you run the Tomcat, it will be exploded into simple web folder here. So all you have to do is go back in this command prompt, startup.bat. So that starts the Tomcat. So you can say it's bringing the Spring Boot again. So once this has started, we should be able to go and hit the accounts URL again, and it should be working. Doesn't started yet. Okay, now it says started. So going, okay, so this is not going to work, because now we are saying building a web file, and we have a simple web as the context. So the URL is going to change here. So I'm going to put this to simple web, then everything else is going to be the same. So I added the simple web, which is the context, because we have already mentioned the final name in the pom.xml file to be a simple web. And now if I go and refresh this, enter, now we can find the URL and we got the data back. So you're going to have the simple web for all the other URLs as well. So if you're going to hit the RESTful web service, it's going to have simple web v1 forecasting and accounts. Hit enter and you get the JSON data back. So this is how you run it in an external Tomcat. And then if you want to run it internally, I can go and stop this Tomcat server again. So I just go and kill this, and I go and run it here, app, right click on it, run as Java application. You can run it here, or I can go and stop this and debug as, and I can put debug points wherever I want to debug the application, and then also I can debug the Spring Boot application. So that's the power of Spring Boot. So it makes your dependency management easier, and also makes it easier to build rapidly by running it or debugging it as the Spring app. And when you are happy with everything, you can build it as a WAR file, and you can go and deploy it to Tomcat, and you are up and running with the Spring Boot application. So in the next tutorial, I will expand on this Spring Boot, and also we will look at AngularJS all the way going to the Spring Boot RESTful web service. And it is important that you keep in mind that debugging is very powerful here. So all I have to do is I've already started here, so still I can run this, but in this case you need to take the simple web out because I'm running with the embedded one, and it works here. So it gets the accounts, And if you want to debug it, now I can go in here, stop this, and right click on it, and I'm going to say debug as Java application. And I've already got a debug point in the DAO or a DAO impl, wherever it gets the accounts. Where it gets the accounts, I've got a debug point here. So once this application has started, don't worry about this, just a warning. It's saying I need to go into the compiler options and turn the generate line number to on. Let's see if I go to window, preferences, where's the Java compiler? So this is the compiler, store information, preserve, add source file, add line numbers. It's already selected, and say OK. And if I go and click on the refresh button here again, it's in the debug mode now, so it's not going to come back straight away. So if you go back to my thing, I ignore this error. If I go back, it's saying going to be in the debug mode. It has already taken me to the debug window here, and stopping on account DAO impl.get accounts on line number 25, and this where it stopped. I want to see what's coming from this query. So it hasn't executed the results yet, you only have the query here. So if I go step to the next, it goes in here. This would have automatically gone to the database, because you can also see the select query hibernate has shown the correct the select query. It has executed this query to the database. And if I look at the list here, you should have two entries here, and one is, double click on it. So one is the account ID 111 John 256. The second one is 2222 name Peter, balance 303. So we have shown how the different ways to run it in an embedded mode, and also we can build it as a WAR file and deploy it to Tomcat as well. So that's the power of Spring Boot. It makes the whole management a lot easier. So we'll catch up in another tutorial soon.